Today's topic is going to dive into something that really frankly is kind of public enemy number one with the pelvic floor, but many times gets overlooked, even with other pelvic floor therapists and with our doctors. And this is like a second vital sign. We really need to be paying attention to our poop. Okay, our poop gives us so much valuable information and insight into our health. So especially if your poops are irregular, if you struggle back and forth with diarrhea or constipation, or maybe you have IBS or Crohn's disease or some of these issues, even celiacs, right? These issues that are very gut related, but our poop tells us so many signs going on in our pelvic floor.
Hey, I'm your host, Dr. Desiree Cassell. I'm an orthopedic and pelvic floor physical therapist specializing in women's health, aka pelvic floor. I'm a wife, mom of 3, foodie, lover of all things movement and nature, and I'm super passionate about educating, empowering, and supporting other women like you to find and maintain balance throughout all aspects of their lives, without pain, pressure, or peeing their pants. And this is the Balanced Momtality Podcast, where we will talk about all things pelvic floor, your core, and optimizing your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum recovery, providing you with the knowledge and tools so that you can feel like the strong, playful, and happy mom that you and your family deserve. Now let's get you out of those pads and back to loving movement. Fill up your water, pop in those AirPods, roll out your mat, and let's connect. Before we start today's episode, just a quick disclaimer that anything mentioned in this podcast is not meant to treat or diagnose any medical conditions. If you have any questions or concerns about your healthcare needs, please seek the care of your medical provider. This is also a safe space where we will be talking about very sensitive but important topics, such as issues with peeing and pooping, relationships, and even sex. So if you have littles around, probably a good idea to pop those AirPods in. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Hey friend, thanks so much for joining me for another week on the Balanced Momtality Podcast. And if you're new here, I really hope you enjoy this episode and just feel encouraged and inspired to start taking your health and healing into your own hands and maybe go binge some old episodes, because I have a lot of good stuff packed into this podcast. I go over so much of the foundational basics that I think every single person should know, but especially women, because obviously we have a lot more going on in our pelvic floor. But guys have a pelvic floor too, so they can also benefit from this information for sure. But learning about the breath work, learning about posture and pressure management, lifting mechanics, these are all so many foundational aspects of healing and restoring. And you can find a lot of these tips and strategies and just more information on why we care in my other episodes in the podcast. So go feel free to binge some old episodes. And if you have any questions, come over to the Balanced Momtality Wellness and Support Group and ask them. It is a free and private group. I also am encouraging anybody to give me any tips on some podcast episodes or topics that they would like to hear more about. But if you've been listening and you have found this helpful and informative, again, this is information I think everybody should know. So if you haven't already, it would be such a big favor, and I would just appreciate it so much if you took the time to leave me a 5-star review, especially if you're on iTunes. This really helps my podcast get shared with other women searching for these common issues that we just accept as normal. And I would be so grateful. And if you screenshot it and post it on your social media, even more thanks to you. Just helps me spread the word about everything I am doing here and my mission. So I am here to help reframe and just change the standard of care for women's health and just bring this knowledge to every woman. We need to know these things. And at this point, I feel like pelvic floor is kind of a trending thing, which is kind of cool, right? It's getting so much more information out that this even exists because when I got pregnant with my first daughter at 19, I had her at 20. I was peeing my pants for 6 years. I just accepted it. My doctors told me it was normal. My mom told me it was normal. My other mom friends told me it was normal. So of course, I'm just going to accept that. But when I went to PT school and got my specialty in pelvic floor, I really just was so mind blown. I was partially frustrated and partially so excited because frustrated I didn't find this information sooner enough. Frustrated no one told me this was even a thing, but excited that there was something that could help me and there was hope, right? So if that's you and you've been feeling like you lost hope, or you've done all the tests and it's been negative, or you've just been told over and over again that your pain is normal, that your leaking is normal, it's not. And so I'm here to rewrite that narrative. And today's topic is going to dive into something that really, frankly, is kind of public enemy number one with the pelvic floor, but many times gets overlooked, even with other pelvic floor therapists and with our doctors. And this is like a second vital sign. We really need to be paying attention to our poop. Okay. Our poop gives us so much valuable information and insight into our health. So especially if your poops are irregular, if you struggle back and forth with diarrhea or constipation, or maybe you have IBS or Crohn's disease or some of these issues, even celiacs, right? These issues that are very gut related, but our poop tells us so many signs going on in our pelvic floor. Because if you're struggling with some of those things, you're probably also battling diarrhea and constipation. Or if you've been on opioids and pain meds or other antidepressants, and there's a bunch of medications that unfortunately cause terrible constipation. And constipation is public enemy number one for the pelvic floor. It really is, because even if you're having only leaking, right? If you're leaking urine, you're just leaking urine when you sneeze, when you cough, maybe you have a little bit of urgency associated with your bladder and you're going to the bathroom a lot, which I did a episode last week. I believe it was last week. The weeks are already blending together in summer mode, about interstitial cystitis and bladder pain and a lot of the things that can contribute to that. And I kind of mentioned that constipation can affect that, but I wanted to dive deeper into why we really need to be paying attention to our poop and why we should care and what it's telling us and a few things you can do about it. So again, if we just think about the physical mechanics of being constipated, so we'll start with constipation. And this is mostly going to be about constipation. So with heaviness, right, there's actual weight just sitting on the pelvic bowl. That is going to cause those muscles to strain and tighten. And then you're struggling with getting a big, heavy, firm stool out of a tiny little hole. And this can be such a feedback loop, right? Where now we can't get it out. So that stool gets larger and now it's even harder to get through. So we strain and we push, and you might even like close your mouth and really bear down, and you're just really trying to push it out. But again, that is the worst thing we can do, is straining and pushing and bearing down, because that's so much extra pressure on the pelvic organs, on the pelvic floor. And so this puts you at a lot more risk for pelvic organ prolapse, hemorrhoids, hernias even, pelvic pain, pain with intercourse, fissures and tearing. So especially if you have a history of fissures, which are little tears that can be in the vulvar area or even the rectal anal area, that is an indication that there is tightness in your pelvic floor. And many times the providers are treating that topically with some creams, which can help, but it's kind of a band-aid solution. Why are those fissures showing up? Yes, the tissue's fragile, so we want to address that, but it's also usually because the opposite side or an area near there is yanking. There's tightness and pulling on that space. So again, this is just such a vicious cycle. The straining, the weight on the pelvic floor, and then if you add the actual gut component internally, if you're constipated, those tissues are also inflamed. And on the other side of constipation, if you have diarrhea, that is a direct indication that there's inflammation in your gut, right? That's why it's pulling all of this fluid out of your system and putting it into your gut. And you can have a lot more fluid in the cells of your intestinal lining. And sometimes this is from celiacs or an allergy or a sensitivity. But other times we can see diarrhea as the offset of constipation, and you kind of go back and forth, right? Because if you're backed up and constipated, your body tries to get it out by softening everything and pulling out a lot of water. So then you end up having diarrhea to get everything out. But that inflammation and all of that water really is an irritant, inflammatory process of the bowels. And so one, that's really unfortunate and not healthy for our gut. And we need to figure out that root cause. Why are we getting diarrhea? Or why are we going back and forth between diarrhea and constipation? We need to be looking at that gut piece because we know it affects the pelvic floor. If there is inflammation in the body, in that pelvic space, whether it's in the colon or the uterus or the bladder, that pelvic floor is feeling it, and it usually tightens to guard and protect that space. And as I just mentioned, that is very unhelpful, right? When you're trying to have a bowel movement and get everything to relax and open up, and now everything is super tight because you have tension and guarding, or maybe you have a bad habit of clenching your glutes and holding your pelvic floor really tight without even noticing, and that's contributing to your constipation. Either way, hopefully when you are seeing a pelvic floor PT, or if you're going to see a GI doctor for the constipation, hopefully there is some awareness there that pelvic floor PT is going to be crucial for you. Because remember, even if it's a gut issue, your pelvic floor is going to be responding and could end up contributing to those issues because it's going to tighten up, making that sphincter space a lot harder to flex and open and relax and get out of the way so you can have a healthy bowel movement and not feel like you're straining and pushing against a wall. But on the other end, maybe you're constipated simply because that sphincter is too tight and your gut is actually pretty healthy. And your stools are coming out soft and connected, but they're more the size of your pinky or, a small thin snake instead of a banana or a large sausage. Because never TMI here, right? I talk about pee, poop, and sex all the time. But as I start talking about poop, people can be kind of like, oh, that's a lot of information about your poop. But I think it's really helpful if you're unsure what your poop should look like. There's a thing called the Bristol stool chart, and you can look this up on Google or anywhere on the internet, and it will give you a good chart of different stool consistencies and what they should look like. Because typically we do want that full, solid, connected stool that's about the size of a banana or a large sausage, and it's soft, right? So yeah, if you're getting those big, bulky stools, but they're super rock hard, that's abnormal, and that's more on the side of constipation. So for that, we do want to make sure that you are drinking plenty of water, okay? So these are some of those tips to help resolve some of this constipation. We really need to make sure you're having enough water. Most of my patients are not. Even if they say they're having a lot of water, it's not enough, especially as we get to these summer hot days where you're sweating or you're active and losing a lot of water. Now we have to increase even more, or you're pregnant or breastfeeding, right? We need a lot more water than we might think. So the bare minimum is half your body weight in ounces, okay? So I'm about 160 pounds. I am supposed to drink a minimum of about 80 ounces. That's a lot. And that's a minimum. Okay. So if I'm outside doing yard work, that's even more. If I'm being active, it's even more. If I were breastfeeding or pregnant, it'd be even more. If I was healing for some surgery, it would be even more. And so it's so helpful to make sure that you're getting enough water. And one of my favorite tips for this is to have a cup or a water bottle that is yours. You know how much that cup or water bottle holds, and you carry it with you everywhere. One, so that it's just in your face annoying you and you'll probably end up drinking more water, but also this really helps you track it, right? So I do have one of those larger knockoff Stanley cups, and so mine's a 40-ounce cup. This means I need to drink 2 of those a day. minimum. So for me, I have timestamps. I fill it up in the morning, and then ideally by 12, it's empty and I'm filling it up again. And then when I get home for work or in the afternoon, it's around 3 or 4, I'm about to start thinking about dinner. I'm checking in again, filling up my cup. Hopefully I drank it all. And if not, I'm trying to drink more water. And that way, when I fill that cup up again in the afternoon, whatever I get in extra is just that bonus. And I'm trying to even drink that whole bottle if I knew I was super active. And with that, we need to be careful, right? Because if we drink too much plain water, we can also offset our electrolytes. So I do think that it's also super beneficial to make sure you're having some electrolytes. Maybe you're adding a little bit of lemon or salt to your water. There's a lot of great electrolyte packs out now that don't have a lot of sugar. Obviously, things like Gatorade and stuff have electrolytes, but they're really high in sugar content, so it can really offset the benefit there. But even just eating fruits. Okay, fruits and vegetables have a lot of great electrolytes in them. We need to make sure we are keeping that electrolyte fluid balance, or else we'll have a lot of issues like muscle cramps. Your bladder will become a lot more irritable. You'll be just achy. You'll get headaches a lot more often, fatigue, muscle stiffness. So many issues come from just not having enough water, and especially constipation. So we need to make sure we're drinking enough water. But on the other side of that, I'm sure you've all heard of fiber. Obviously, fiber is another big tool that we use to manage constipation, but we do need to be careful with fiber as well, because if you weren't having very much water and then you go straight to adding fiber in, you can actually make yourself even more constipated and backed up, because that fiber really helps to bulk up the stool and help everything hold and connect together. So if you choose to increase your fiber intake, which again, most of us are not having enough fiber, especially if you're not consciously consuming enough fruits and vegetables and whole grains with a lot of fiber, you probably need to supplement that, or I would just start auditing it. Ideally, we're having about 30 grams of fiber a day. Okay, so 30 grams is that goal. Start checking in and seeing if you're getting enough or if you need to add some. And if you are adding some, I would make sure that you are increasing your water as well. That way you aren't going to cause that backed up constipation when you're trying to get rid of constipation, obviously, okay? But even better, what I really like is magnesium. And I've talked about this before in other episodes, but magnesium is such a great mineral that we don't get enough of, frankly. So I do believe in getting most of your micronutrients and macronutrients from your diet and getting that through whole foods. However, there are certain things that we just don't get enough of, and magnesium is one of them. This is also very safe and encouraged during pregnancy. So starting with magnesium is, I think, a great safe first route. Obviously, water is number one, but even before fiber, I sometimes like to make sure we're getting enough magnesium. And there are a lot of different types of magnesium. So they're not all created equal, especially when it comes to constipation and the gut. So the type of magnesium that is the most directly related to the gut and is great at softening stools and managing constipation is magnesium citrate. Okay, so magnesium citrate is that one that you're going to want to get as a good supplement if you're struggling with constipation. Another type of magnesium that I find indirectly does help the gut is magnesium glycinate. And that magnesium works so many great things. Magnesium glycinate really calms the nervous system. So especially if you're someone that does feel kind of high strung, it helps with sleep. It helps with just calming that nervous system tone. And I find that that's what really helps with the constipation, because remember, if your anal sphincter is super tight, you can use that glycinate to really help calm the body, and that muscle will relax and actually open up for you. I have patients that take both of these. I have patients that take half a dose, patients that take 4 times the dose. So it's all about playing around with that dosing and seeing what your body needs. But if magnesium isn't something that you're taking or supplementing with, I would look into that. And if you are taking, like, say you take the Calm magnesium, look at the ingredients, because many of those are magnesium oxide. And remember, we do want to try and get magnesium citrate and or magnesium glycinate on board. So diet-wise, looking at fruits and vegetables and just a healthy, well-balanced diet. But aside from some of those obvious ones like water and fiber and, all of those things that can help with constipation, we do want to look at the pelvic floor muscles because that is what can be so tight and causing this negative feedback loop of constipation and pain, tailbone pain, pain with sitting, hemorrhoids, all of these uncomfortable sensations can really be attributed to that tightness in the muscles, pain with intercourse. Maybe you don't even have pain, but you just have leaking and you have constipation. You're probably having leaking because your pelvic floor isn't able to function very well because it's probably really loose around the urethra because it's being pulled and it's so tight around the anal sphincter. So we can't just think, oh, the whole thing's loose or the whole thing's tight. There can be sections that are tight and sections that are loose, or sections that are strong and sections that are weak. And we need to look at all of that. And the first thing of tackling that pelvic floor and restoring that balance is the breath work. So really taking advantage of that breath work. Again, I have so many episodes on the breath work, but getting that awareness of what it feels like to calm that muscle, open it up, and just be able to breathe that poop out instead of forcing and closing your breath. That's where you're going to get the prolapse and the hemorrhoids. And I'll tell you, if you've never had either of those, I've had both. They are not fun. Okay. And I had this before I knew any of these things. But say you're already battling with that and now we're on that healing side. Get into that breath work, start looking at your water intake, your fiber intake, balanced diet, look at magnesium. But then if those symptoms are already there, so talking about just bowel habits, right? We want to make sure you are going daily. So if you're not going daily, you are backed up. And when you go even daily, do you feel like you're fully emptying everything? Do you have to strain to get it out? If so, there's also some dysfunction there. And so one of the other tips that I think is a game changer and really helpful for those bowel habits is when you are on the toilet and you have if you haven't heard of it, a squatty potty. So that squatty potty, it's like a little stool that tucks underneath your toilet and you put your feet on it and it basically elevates your knees to be higher than your hips and it tucks the pelvis in a way that the colon and rectum don't really have to go around a bend anymore. And this can really reduce pressure, especially for people who have rectal prolapse or a rectocele or have trouble getting that bowel movement out. This can really open things up. They're really not that expensive. So if you don't have a squatty potty, I think you should get one, but there's also a lot of makeshift squatty potties that we can do, especially as a mom. If you have young kids with a step stool, you just pull that step stool over, put your feet on it. It does a very similar thing. Or I have patients that take old textbooks that they're not using anymore and stack those in the bathroom by their toilet. Whatever you can do to just elevate those feet, but you need to be able to relax into it. So you don't want to actively elevate the legs. You want to make sure that they can rest. Okay. So that's going to put everything in a better position. And then again, even if you feel a little backed up, as much as you can, avoid the strain, avoid that Valsalva, closing your mouth and really pushing it out. Next time you feel the urge to do that, I want you to catch yourself and instead you're going to breathe it out. So yes, your abs might tense up, they might engage, trying to give some pressure to push things out, but make sure you're exhaling while you're pushing that out, because that at least relieves some of the pressure off of the organs so that you're not just bearing down and pushing everything down. So breathing mechanics are really helpful. Using that squatty potty can be really helpful. Making sure you're getting in enough water, looking at fiber, looking at magnesium in your diet. Let's look at the pelvic floor and your breath, get things to really open up and just start thinking of some of these aspects. And if you have no idea where to go with these tips that I've talked about today, that's where you reach out and you get on a coaching session with me so we can dive in a little deeper to what might be truly causing your constipation. Because again, maybe you're just having leaking, maybe you're having back pain, maybe you're struggling with prolapse and you haven't even really realized that constipation has been a story for you your whole life. because I hear this all the time. Oh yeah, I've been constipated since I was a kid. This has always been a struggle for me. That is such a big clue for us, okay? So we need to check in with our poops so we know how healthy we're being. How healthy is our diet? Are those poops floating on the top? If so, we're eating a lot of fat, okay? And so we need those poops to sink. We need them to be whole and soft and easy to get out and eliminate. And if that's not the case, reach out. Let's dive in a little deeper and find a solution that will really get to that root cause of not only your constipation, but also your pelvic floor problems, okay? So again, come over to the Balanced Momtality Wellness and Support Group and let me know what you think about this episode, or if you have any other questions about poops, or if you have any other topic requests for the podcast. But otherwise, I'll see you here next week on the Balanced Momtality Podcast. Well, that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day. I know you've got so many other important things going on, but I hope it was helpful and you leave here with some tools to help you in your healing journey. And I just want to ask you, if you have found this helpful, to please leave a review on iTunes. Scroll down to the bottom of my podcast page and leave that 5-star review so it can help other women see this information. And also, if you want to be a part of my community of amazing women trying to balance all the things, great tips and insight and sharing stories and just motivating each other along the way, feel free to join my Facebook group, The Balanced Momtality Wellness and Support. I hope to see you here next time on the Balanced Momtality Podcast.